Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have all the latest on the visit to Washington by Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's been given a full red carpet welcome. Plus, heavy winter rains unleash new suffering across Gaza, where displaced families living in makeshift tents now face flooding, freezing temperatures and the threat of waterborne diseases. We'll be speaking to the World Health Organization's regional director about that. Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, it is day 2 of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's high-profile visit to the United States. And we're going to continue our coverage of this special trip. Well, here's the latest for you. Investment and economic cooperation have been and look to remain central to this visit, with major deals and exchanges taking shape. Well, sitting side by side at the White House, President Trump called the Saudi Crown Prince a friend and thanked him for the $600 billion of investments in the U.S. economy.
And I want to thank you because you've agreed to invest $600 billion into the United States. And because he's my friend, he might make it $1 trillion, but I'm going to have to work on him. But it's 600. We can count on 600 billion, but that number could go up a little bit higher, yes, or I don't know. We'll see. But we appreciate it very much. So Saudi is going to be investing at least $600 billion, and that means investments in plants, in companies, money on Wall Street, and what it really means for everybody that really counts is jobs, a lot of jobs.
Okay, President Trump speaking there. Well, no sooner had he said that, and the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman surprised his hosts by announcing he would increase the kingdom's investment commitment from $600 billion to up to $1 trillion. Let's take a listen.
I believe, Mr. President, today and tomorrow we're going to announce that we are going to increase that $600 billion to almost $1 trillion of investment, real investment and real opportunity by details in many areas. And the agreement that we are signing today in many areas in technology, in AI, in rare earth materials, magnet, etc., that will create a lot of investment opportunities.
So you are doing that now. You're saying to me now that the 600 billion will be 1 trillion.
Definitely, because what we are signing, it will facilitate that, and we will go on it.
Well, later on that same evening, speaking at a White House dinner honouring Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, President Trump praised the Saudi delegation, calling them great negotiators. Well, in return, the Crown Prince highlighted the deep ties between his country and the United States.
And members of the Saudi delegation, we want to thank you very much for being with us. We spent a lot of time with you today in the cabinet. You're extremely good negotiators, that I can tell you. I want to thank the Crown Prince for the role he played in the transformational peace deal that was achieved last month.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the warm and great welcome that we have today. We feel home, and this relation started around close to 9 decades ago with Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz, who established the modern Saudi Arabia. Today, it's a special day. We think the horizon of the economical cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the rest of America, it's bigger and wider in many areas. We've been signing a lot of agreements that are going to open the door to develop the relation deeper.
Well, one of the big announcements made at the White House dinner, marking 80 years of US-Saudi relations, is President Trump's designation of Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally. That's a move that deepens their defense and economic partnership.
So that's why tonight I'm pleased to announce that we're taking our military cooperation to even greater heights by formally designating Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Matt Terrill, who is the former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio. He is now the Managing Partner of Firehouse Strategies. He joins us from Washington. Matt, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for agreeing to speak to us. I mean, a lot of pomp and ceremony, I think it's fair to say, last night with the various events at the White House. Probably you could say that it matched the same pomp and ceremony that Crown Prince Mohammed Salman gave to President Trump during his visit to Saudi Arabia back in May. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
Absolutely, no question about it. The red carpet was rolled out for President Trump when he was overseas doing his visit, and certainly the red carpet was rolled out yesterday during that visit as well by the prince. And look, this just shows the growing partnership, the great partnership that the United States has with Saudi Arabia. And I think what you saw wasn't just policymakers or politicians a part of this, but key members of the business community. You saw celebrities, Tiger Woods, for example, at the dinner last night. So this just shows the partnership that the United States has with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, it just wasn't about the dinner last night. It's also about deal making here. Certainly deals are being made, whether it's on AI and technology or the sale of F-35 fighter jets. That certainly are all things that were important, certainly to Saudi Arabia, I think, and also certain things, of course, being tackled here that are important in the United States as well.
I'm going to ask you a bit more about that dinner last night and who was there, if we have time a bit later in the interview. But I really want to pick up on a couple of those points you just made there about the AI agreements, the F-35s. I mean, these are pieces of military hardware and tech that the United States doesn't just sell to anyone, does it?
They don't. In fact, there are countries who have wanted this hardware. The UAE, for example, I believe, has wanted this hardware. Look, Israel has this hardware, and obviously that's a dynamic here. But I think what it shows is that President Trump, the United States, has great trust in Saudi Arabia, great respect for Saudi Arabia. And, this is just building on that partnership. I don't believe this sale would take place unless there's that trust with Saudi Arabia that the United States now has and has had for a number of years, of course. So, look, this is obviously a valuable sale to Saudi Arabia, but it's also a commitment by the United States when it comes to defense purposes. You also saw President Trump talk about, the importance of having kind of this NATO-like relationship, if you will, with Saudi Arabia. So, look, this is something that was important, I think, to Saudi Arabia for quite some time. Now this sale is going to take place of these F-35s. It's obviously a big deal. It's kind of the crown jewel, if you will, fighter jet that's out there. Many countries want it.
Indeed. Then, of course, there was the promise that Saudi Arabia is going to invest as much as $1 trillion in the United States. That's up sharply on a previous pledge of $600 billion US dollars. Do you think the fact that it went from 600 billion to $1 trillion took a lot of people by surprise there?
Yeah, look, with President Trump, often you see these numbers go up when he's negotiating with countries and with companies. But look, I think it's just showing that this is a serious next step, if you will, that both Saudi Arabia and the United States wants to take. I think Saudi Arabia recognizes that, they've been seeing President Trump talk about that golden era or that golden age, if you will, that President Trump wants to lead the United States towards. But Saudi Arabia wants to lead towards their own golden age. And the best way for them to do that is to continue to have a greater partnership between Saudi Arabia and the United States. And part of that is investment. And so I think, this investment is going to be good for Saudi Arabia, but it's also a good investment for the United States. You're going to see this investment trickle into the U.S. economy. In fact, you saw just yesterday someone in the Oval Office who was talking about how this would impact states like South Carolina, through job growth, for example. So, look, this is a real deal for the citizens of the U.S. Right now, obviously, affordability, the U.S. economy is top of mind among the American people. And when President Trump is working to tackle those issues, such as affordability, I think part of that isn't just talking about domestic things that he's doing here in the United States, but also these kind of key commitments, such as from Saudi Arabia. Getting this investment into the U.S. economy is obviously vital and something I think will help bolster the U.S. economy in the years to come here.
I mean, clearly, President Trump, who's nearly 80, has a very good rapport with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who is half President Trump's age. He's just turned 40. President Trump called him, quote, a very good friend of mine, and said he'd done incredible things. And I wanted to ask you, Matt, how important you think that rapport between those two men is and has been in helping us get to the point that we're now talking about $1 trillion deals.
Yeah, I think it's vital. Look, when you look at deals, whether it's in the private sector or a leader making deals with countries, it comes down to having good relationships. Being able to negotiate, cut deals, you got to have a good relationship and the ability to have trust. And I think these two leaders have that in one another. But also, I think it's important to note that it's not just on these deals, but go back and take a look, for example, when the U.S. was involved with the war with Iran, between Israel and Iran. You saw Saudi Arabia really step up there, during that bombing, if you will, that campaign by the U.S. You saw Saudi Arabia step up to the plate and really help and support the U.S. during that campaign. I think that just goes to show they are a true ally. They've become I think, greater ally for the U.S. And I think that's something President Trump has worked on over a series of years. It hasn't just been his second term here that this is all, sort of kind of happened in terms of this relationship. You got to go back and take a look at his first term when he was doing this, not just with Saudi Arabia, but other leaders, if you will, in the Middle East. Obviously, the Abraham Accords were a big, big win for President Trump and his administration, and I think for the world, frankly, in his first term. We'll see what happens next with Saudi Arabia with respect to the Abraham Accords. But I think this was really a very effective trip here that we saw here to Washington, and really something that I think goes to show that there's just greater abilities here for both of these nations to enter that next golden age that I think both these leaders want both their countries to enter into.
Yeah, so something we're hearing from you, and we've heard from other guests as well, this sense that security ties between Saudi Arabia and the United States are stronger than ever. Economic and business ties are stronger than ever. And that's probably why some 400 CEOs from Saudi and US companies have gathered for this US-Saudi investment forum. What's your understanding of what that forum's all about, Matt?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of investment taking place here, and that's going to be huge for the private sector, right? I mean, you take a look at some of the key investments being made. It's not just with defense and aircraft and military hardware, but we've talked about, the fact that this AI investment, so I think you're going to see, for example, just here in the United States, many of the leaders of the big tech companies here in the United States really working hand in hand with Saudi Arabia leadership. So look, part of this is just, these are business deals, and these are investments that are going to be integrated through private sector companies here in the U.S. And so, look, this is not just about, defense. It's not just about the Abraham Accords. This isn't just about, trying to, drive peace in the Middle East, which I think Saudi Arabia will be critical towards. This is also about, private sector deals being made here. They're going to have a huge impact, I think, not just on Saudi Arabia, but also on, frankly, the United States. I go back to, job growth, job creation is vital right now here in the U.S. You're seeing Americans really talk about affordability, job creation, these kind of investments you have from countries, whether it was the trade deal with Japan that President Trump made, or this deal that's being made with Saudi Arabia, building on that $600 billion investment to get to $1 trillion, that's greater investment into the private sector, into the United States. And so these CEOs are going to want to be at the table to help drive that investment, to help utilize that investment as they're making key opportunities here in the U.S. as well. You talk about onshoring of jobs. It's not the public sector that does that. It's the private sector. That's why you need these CEOs at the table here to help drive this.
Right, and I said I would ask you if we had time, and we apparently do, to ask you a little bit about the dinner last night, because as you said, Cristiano Ronaldo, the football player who plays for the Saudi club Al Nassr, was amongst the guests there. You mentioned Tiger Woods. Elon Musk was there too. And I'm just wondering whether the fact that Elon Musk was there means that perhaps bridges have been mended, have they, between Elon Musk and President Trump?
I think so. Look, I think they're both individuals who are our leaders at the end of the day. And look, you saw that not just last night with Elon Musk being there. He was, Elon Musk was at the Charlie Kirk Memorial service just a few weeks ago and had a moment with President Trump there as well. So look, I think that relationship, I think has been repaired. I mean, look, is it going to be, candidly, is it probably going to be the same of what it was? Probably not, right? I think President Trump is somebody who certainly forgives but doesn't forget. And obviously there was some turbulence there in that relationship. At the end of the day, Elon Musk is an incredible individual in the sense of being an innovator, of being a business leader. Obviously, I think President Trump really appreciated what Elon Musk did through the Doge campaign, if you will, and the work that Elon Musk has done in that effort. So, look, I think both these men respect each other. And really, at the end of the day, President Trump is surrounding himself with people that he respects, trusts, and knows. And I think he has that in Elon Musk. And obviously, there were other people, to your point, there last night as well. You're seeing many business titans, CEOs, celebrities, people like Tiger Woods, as I mentioned, there as well. So, really this was almost like a state dinner, right? I mean, it technically wasn't, but it had the effect of it and had the feel of it. That just goes to show, again, the respect, the trust that President Trump has in Saudi Arabia, and the appreciation I think he has for this great partnership that they're only going to build on. I think, frankly, it's going to be exciting to see what happens next here.
Yeah, indeed. And President Trump did say that his son, Barron, is a big fan of Cristiano Ronaldo. Not something I knew. But just going back to the matter in hand, just to wrap up this conversation, Matt, I mean, we're talking here about a pretty much century-old bond between Saudi Arabia and the United States. And as you've been saying, the red carpet has been very much rolled out for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, all the trappings of a state visit. What would be your greatest takeaways from this visit so far? And then as an extension of that question, what's been the photo moment, would you say, of this trip?
Well, I think the photo moment was when they were standing outside the White House yesterday, and you had those F-35s fly over. And it's not uncommon for President Trump to do a flyover when you have world leaders visiting the White House. But I think it was showing, to the world, frankly, what the possibilities are if you partner with the United States, if you build greater friendship with the United States. And I think you're seeing that on full display here. And I think the bigger takeaways, though, out of this are going to be what happens next, right? Talk is talk, but action really matters. But I think what you're seeing is this action is already underway. And I think really it's just not going to be on the investments that we're talking about, but certainly what happens next with the Abraham Accords. I actually think that Saudi Arabia over the next year will join the Abraham Accords. I believe that that's going to take place. I think you will see that happen. Obviously, they talked about some of the dynamics that Saudi Arabia wants to see take shape in order to do that. But I am confident that they will join the Abraham Accords. So it's one of the big things to watch. That is, frankly, one of President Trump's legacy projects, if you will. And frankly, the bigger elements at play here are the Middle East itself. President Trump, has been working to end wars. One of those, of course, was this horrific war in the Middle East that has now come to an end. But what are the next steps on ensuring sustained peace in the Middle East, sustained momentum to ensuring that new wars don't break out? And I think it's just this new opportunity in the Middle East. But I think what President Trump recognizes is that he can't be the only leader to try and bring greater peace to the Middle East. He's got to have great partnerships there in the region to do that. And I believe that he believes that Saudi Arabia can be that great leader to help spread that peace and economic opportunity through the Middle East, which really could be that next golden age that I think we all around the world want to see happen, and not just in terms of peace, but economic opportunity for those who really need it the most right now.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. A pleasure talking to you. Matt Terrill, former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio, Managing Partner of Firehouse Strategies. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Greg Swenson, a friend of the show and chair of Republicans Overseas. He joins us now from Chicago. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Greg. I mean, what's really striking talking to our guests today is the sense of the strength of economic ties and security ties. Fair to say those two aspects of the relationship have really never been stronger between Washington and Riyadh.
Yeah, Tom, it's a good point. I mean, we've always had a really productive relationship. They've always been an ally of the U.S. If you go back to George H.W. Bush, who basically invaded Iraq in Desert Storm to defend the Saudis. But it's been really since the war a really tight relationship between the two. But you're right, President Trump has definitely elevated it. The only time we had difficult relations with the Saudis was during the first few years of the Biden administration. When President Biden, was always finding a way to insult or offend our allies, whether it was Israel or Saudis or the UK. So it's nice to see the president back in office and really elevating that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Riyadh views the United States as a primary strategic partner. And I'm just wondering whether that level of trust is reciprocated. I mean, assuming it is, because look at some of those deals that relate to very sensitive things, whether it's nuclear power, whether it's AI chips, or whether it's extremely sophisticated military hardware.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the F-35s. You know, you mentioned military hardware. There's a lot of security relationship there, and I think it's important for the U.S. to have another ally in the region, another strong ally, much like the UAE and Israel. But also to have you know, the investment into the U.S. That's really critical. And of course, there's always been a dependency or even codependency on the energy that comes from Saudi. And, you know, it's, even though the U.S. is now the world's largest energy producer, it's still really important to have the Saudis on our team there, and you know, keeping production up and keeping prices down. So it's, and you saw that again when Biden, you know, was very hostile to MBS and very hostile to the energy sector in the U.S. And when prices really increased dramatically, he went begging to Riyadh and begged MBS to pump more oil. Of course, he declined. So I think we've seen how the relationship can be a really important economic factor with oil prices.
Yeah, and we were talking before we crossed to you about how originally it was reported that Saudi Arabia would invest as much as $600 billion in the United States. But while sitting in the Oval Office next to President Trump, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said that actually the investment could be as much as $1 trillion. Yeah. President Trump looked pretty surprised. Were you?
Not really. I think the president has a way with people. He's able to get commitments for huge sums. I'm not 100% sure that he will actually meet that target, but just to make that commitment is pretty incredible. So you're seeing just a massive surge in foreign direct investment into the U.S. I mean, it's always been a destination for the Gulf states, but even more so now. And I think that's another reason why we'll see a really robust economy next year.
Talk us a bit about the Defense Cooperation Pact and the fact that Saudi Arabia has been designated now as a major non-NATO ally. What's the significance of that?
I think it's tremendous, Tom. I mean, again, as I mentioned, it's important to have another ally in the region. You know, you basically have just about all the powerful nations now against Iran, and that's important for U.S. security and for security in the region. But also behind every security move now, you have to think about China. And it was really important for this president not to have the countries in the Gulf align with China. You know, you can trade with China, but you just don't want to be their ally. And so in many respects, this commitment really solidifies the relationship that the Saudis have, not only with the U.S., but with the West in general. And then again, keeping a lid on the expansion of Chinese military assets.
And the fact that F-35 fighter jets are going to be sold to Saudi Arabia. I mean, these are cutting edge warplanes. They're really special pieces of weaponry. And again, the United States doesn't sell that kind of hardware to just anyone, does it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're careful about that, but we do sell them to, obviously, to our NATO allies, and you'll see more of that with the increase in defense spending. This is a really important moment in NATO. Basically, NATO's got a commitment now. All the countries are committing to 5% of GDP. So you'll see a lot more F-35s and other technology being moved around the world. But again, it's really important to have another ally in the region besides Israel. And so I think the president is all for it, and wants to make sure that that the Saudis are well armed, because they are now a significant ally. The other thing to keep in mind is they'll have to do a lot of training. There'll be a lot more interaction between the militaries. I would imagine, the F-35 is an Air Force plane, so fighter. So you'll see a lot of cross-border training and interaction between the U.S. Air Force and the Saudi Air Force. So this is a good moment, but again, I think you always have to keep China in mind.
Now, the green light's been given for advanced artificial intelligence chips to be provided to Saudi Arabia. Why is this such a sensitive issue in the United States?
In terms of the chips, Tom?
In terms of the chips. In terms of the chips, why is it such a delicate issue, and why would the United States be so cautious about signing off on this?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And it's ultimately, again, it brings China into the conversation. Our biggest concern is that these extra sensitive chips end up in the Chinese military, in the PLA. And I think that's really a caution or a concern for the U.S. military. And so I think it's demonstrating some real trust of the Saudis that we're going to have our sensitive chips being shipped there. So I think that's another step in this tightening of the relationship. And it's important, again, to look after our allies, whether it's with chips and technology or with military equipment. So I think you'll probably see more of that, not less.
Now, we're told that some 400 CEOs of Saudi and US companies gathered today for this US-Saudi investment forum. What's your understanding of what that forum's all about, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, look, the floodgates are open. There's going to be so much cross-border investment, especially incoming foreign direct investment into the U.S. from Saudi. But I think you'll see, it'd be really beneficial for both countries, right? As you mentioned the chips, and I think we're a great supplier to the Saudis in a number of different areas, and so it'll be a two-way street. But I think that $1 trillion number is significant. So a lot of U.S. businesses are going to be looking for capital, and personally, I'm actually pretty active in that arena right now. And so Maria Bartiromo, who's one of the most famous financial reporters or financial journalists, is moderating the conference today. And I think you'll see a lot of handshakes or maybe even a lot of contracts come out of it.
Interesting to see who was at the dinner last night in Washington. Cristiano Ronaldo, who of course plays for a Saudi football team, was there. Tiger Woods, I'm told, was there. Elon Musk was there. Were you surprised to see him on the guest list?
Not really. I think they kind of kissed and made up over the last few months. I think there was a lot of drama. I of course had a lot of inquiry. I seem to only get phone calls from certain media, not Al Arabiya, of course, but certain media only calls when there's a fight with Elon Musk or there's something about the Epstein files. So I find it not surprising that he was there because they did have their spat, but the president's had spats with many people and often kisses and makes up.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, the relationship between President Trump and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. I mean, anyone who watched the Oval Office press conference yesterday will have seen there's a considerable amount of warmth between the two men. They clearly get along well. And I'm just wondering whether you think that and their friendship is really a driving force behind deals to the tune of $1 trillion US.
Without a doubt. I mean, the president has reached out to, both of his first international trips in both of his terms were to Saudi. And so I think it's important to highlight that. And yeah, he has a great relationship with MBS. He's got a similar relationship with others in the region, and I think that, he's really popular in the region. I love to see it. And that's why I think there's so much opportunity to do business with the UAE, with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia. I think there's going to be a lot more. Maybe perhaps kicked off originally by the Abraham Accords back in his first term, but surely there's been a real elevation again of the relationship. And yeah, that's in great part due to President Trump and his fondness for MBS, but also his fondness for the country and the region.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Greg Swenson, Chair of Republicans Overseas. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Well, let's get more. We can speak now to Van Hipp Jr., who is chairman of American Defense International and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Army. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Van, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Just first of all, I wanted to ask you, you've described the defense deal that's been agreed upon there in Washington between Saudi Arabia and the United States as a major milestone. I wondered whether you could sort of unpack that for us.
It is. I think it's a big deal, both from a national security standpoint and from an economic standpoint. And what President Trump announced last night, this is a $142 billion arms package from the United States going to Saudi Arabia. And it's the largest arms package I believe the United States has ever done. In addition, the Crown Prince announced that that $600 billion upcoming investment in the United States is going to increase to $1 trillion. So it's a big deal, I think, for both countries. And President Trump called Saudi Arabia a strategic and strong non-NATO ally.
Right, I wanted to ask you about that. So we've got this US-Saudi Strategic Defense Agreement, an SDA, which has been signed on Tuesday. And we've also got Saudi Arabia being designated a major non-NATO ally. What does that change?
Well, I think it strengthens the security cooperation. And I think what the big story, the backstory here is there's a race going on between the United States and China in 3 technology areas that I believe are the game changers for the battlefield of the future. That's artificial intelligence, that's quantum, and that's spectrum. And I think what President Trump is doing with key allies like Saudi Arabia is trying to bring them more into the U.S. sphere instead of China. And that's a lot of what we saw in President Trump's recent trip to Asia as well. So, and if you'll notice, a big part of this trip is focusing on artificial intelligence. In fact, today, the U.S. Saudi Arabia Business Council is hosting a major meeting at the Kennedy Center today in Washington, D.C. with U.S. and Saudi businesses. And one of the big focuses is on artificial intelligence.
Right, those chips are highly sought after, aren't they? And the United States doesn't just sell them or give them to anyone, do you?
No, we don't. And I will say this, the United States has a great security assistance command in Riyadh. I know, and I've known some of these folks. They're great people. They're true security professionals. And so you can rest assured that everything has been vetted the right way before this technology goes to Saudi Arabia.
Okay, let's just talk about being a major non-NATO ally. That's a very small club, isn't it?
It is. And for example, you take Sweden, for example. Before Sweden went into NATO, we consider them a non-NATO ally. But it is a big designation, and it shows the importance of that relationship between our 2 countries. And they've been a great ally, in particular with regard to the Iranian nuclear threat.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the F-35 stealth fighters, because the flyby yesterday in Washington actually featured this exact type of aircraft, or a similar type of aircraft. And it's been announced that these cutting-edge warplanes are going to be sold to Saudi Arabia. Now, that's really significant, isn't it? Tell us what's so special about these airplanes.
Well, it's the latest and the best, but we have different versions of it. So different countries will get different versions of the F-35. It's not been announced which version of the F-35 Saudi will get. But outside of NATO, I think we're looking at close to 48 of these F-35s being sold to Saudi Arabia. And by all accounts, this will be the largest sale of F-35s to a non-NATO member.
Okay, and not just F-35s, 300 American tanks, we're told, are going to be bought by Saudi Arabia. I mean, put that into context to us. Is that a very large number to be sold all at once?
Well, it is, and that total package is $142 billion, which makes it the largest American arms package ever put together for an ally at one time. So this is a big deal.
What does that tell us?
Well, it tells us the strength of the relationship, and that President Trump wants that relationship to be even stronger there in the Middle East. And I think it sends a strong message to China. I think that's the backstory here. President Trump is sending a strong message to China as we bring more and more allies into the U.S. sphere on these technologies. One thing that they're going to talk about too, for example, is the peaceful use of nuclear energy. President Trump has recently embarked on a program to what I call really make Dwight Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program really carry it to the next level. And we're seeing a big focus on small modular nuclear reactors. We're seeing this country strengthen the nuclear workforce. we're going to have a tremendous global energy demand that's only going to increase over the next 15, 20 years. And there's going to be a major, major need for more energy, more forms of energy, particularly in the developing world. And then as we have more artificial intelligence, that's going to drive up with these data centers the energy demand. So we've got to go nuclear, and this is an area too that Saudi wants to cooperate with the United States, and the president wants to see that.
Yeah, and a bit like what you were telling us about with artificial intelligence chips and with military deals like the ones we've been talking about, the F-35s, that civilian use nuclear program carries with it a huge amount of trust, doesn't it?
It sure does. And we've got something called the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is based actually in Vienna. It's been around. It was formerly known as the Atomic Energy Commission. And they really look at the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, but also making sure that nefarious characters aren't using nuclear energy the wrong way either.
So let's just look forwards to where this cooperation and this trust is taking us. I read a quote by the Saudi defense minister who's been taking part in this visit as well, Prince Khalid bin Salman. He says that the SDA, that is the Strategic Defense Agreement, underscores both nations' firm commitment to deepening their strategic partnership, enhancing regional security, and advancing global peace and stability. Just give us a sense of how this SDA is going to manifest itself. Where and how are we going to see it in action?
Well, we're going to see that continued cooperation, and I think we're already beginning to see a lot of it from a training standpoint. With the Saudi military and our military in a wide variety of areas. A lot of this being coordinated through our Security Assistance Command there in Riyadh. But I also think it sends a strong and good message also from the United States to other key allies in the region. Which I think will lead to even more cooperation. And I think eventually we will see, and I'm hopeful for this, Saudi become a member of and join the Abraham Accords as well.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, what really struck me listening to the exchange between President Trump and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is, the degree to which business and economic ties have deepened. But what I'm really gathering from what we're discussing and also from reading a lot of the reports is that security ties between Riyadh and Washington, perhaps stronger than at any point in history. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think it definitely is. And I think it's stronger than it ever has been. And again, I think this is what the Trump administration wanted to see, because it does send a very, very strong message to China as far as the Middle East region is concerned.
Okay, we really appreciate you speaking to us. Van Hipp Jr., Chairman of American Defense International, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Army. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Well, as President Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman push to turn the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas into a lasting regional peace, the humanitarian situation in the Palestinian territory remains dire. Well, recent heavy floods have devastated Khan Yunis, leaving thousands struggling for shelter, food, and clean water. Well, let's get the latest on the health situation in Gaza, and we can speak now to Dr. Hanan Balkhi, who is the WHO's Regional Director for the Eastern Mediterranean. She joins us from Cairo. Dr. Balkhi, thank you very much indeed for speaking to Al Arabiya English. I'd just like to start by asking about some comments that I read that were made by the UN Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq, who says that the situation in Gaza has sharply deteriorated as a result of some heavy rainfall and obviously a lot of displaced people living in makeshift shelters. What's the latest you're hearing about the situation there?
Yes, so thank you very much. And it's really a true pleasure to be with you here today. But again, talking about a very difficult situation in Gaza where there has been a significant destruction of the infrastructure. The people are living, as you have mentioned, in makeshift tents, in partially or totally destroyed buildings. The situation is very difficult. So from a health perspective, from the mental health perspective, and from the regular health perspective, it's a very challenging situation. Compounded added on that, the rain and the weather changes will even add more stress to the population of Gaza and their ability to access the healthcare, the existing or remaining of the healthcare facilities. We're going to expect to see a different type of dynamics when it comes to outbreaks and infections. We were already seeing a very high increase in communicable diseases and mental health and stress and difficulties in taking care of chronic diseases. But now with the rain also, I'm expecting to see even more trends of disease transmitted through contaminated water and poor sanitation. So the situation is quite difficult right now, and we continue to aspire for a sustained ceasefire so that we can continue to support the people in Gaza.
So, I mean, specifically looking at some of the possible health hazards as a result of this heavy rainfall, plus the insanitary conditions, plus the flooding and the rainfall. I mean, what sorts of diseases, what sorts of infections would you think are particularly likely as you know, a high-risk environment like this?
So I think the diseases have to do with the fact that, again, the environment and the sanitary situation is not well, but also the fact that there was significant destruction on the healthcare system. We're talking about, since October 25, 917 health attacks, with 37 people killed in these attacks. And also 68 health facilities have been affected, 626 ambulances affected, and 178 people injured in these attacks from the healthcare system. So you're talking about a significant weakening of the healthcare system to even support a response to emerging infections from the floods or from the water contamination and the heavy rain. So we're talking about increasing incidences of rash, diarrhea, respiratory diseases, respiratory infections, and with the lack and with the significant stockouts of medications, specifically in the north of Gaza. We can talk about Gaza as a whole. There's significant stockouts of the basic essential medicines. So we're expecting to see more disease, and also remember that we have very, very complex compounded traumas and injuries from what has been taking place over the past 2 years. So we're in a very fragile situation to start with, and now it's going to be even more challenging.
Right, and for the people of Gaza, this is their third consecutive winter that is now approaching. I wanted to ask you what the WHO's main priorities and main activities are in Gaza right now.
I think now that we're in the ceasefire, even though it's a bit of a fragile ceasefire, we have produced, and you can find that on our websites, the production of the 60-day plan during the ceasefire. And we have really focused on 4 major pillars. The first one is that we continue to maintain and expand the life-saving essential health services that has been going on for the past 2 years. The second one that we're focusing on is the public health intelligence, the early warning, so that as these diseases start spreading, we need to understand what are these diseases, how do we control them, how do we contain them. We've done a great job with the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian Red Crescent, UNICEF, Gavi, with the polio immunization programs that took place in last year. So that's part of the second part that we need to do during these coming 2 months. The third area that we're focusing on is the health emergency coordination. So the health cluster with all of the other UN agencies and partners, we lead and coordinate that work. And now we're already discussing and talking about not just the early recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, because that has already been going on during the conflict. During the past 2 years, we've been doing that. But now we hope to move into something more sustainable, with larger sums of money, with larger collaboration with partners on the ground. But at this time, we need to sustain what we have been doing for the past 2 years and try to expand on that with the rest of our partners in these 4 major areas of work.
One thing we heard from the UN relief chief, Tom Fletcher, he said remaining restrictions must be lifted urgently to get more aid in. And I was wondering to what degree the World Health Organization is seeing restrictions on the entry of supplies affecting the work of your operatives on the ground. What's the latest on that?
I think we're still concerned about the restrictions, and not all corridors have been fully open. So the humanitarian corridors are still not openly available for us to move in the number of trucks. There's still major restrictions on what is seen as dual utility products. So we're not able to bring in all of the types of medicines and equipment into Gaza to support the significant needs that exist. And the sheer number of trucks, even though we have been able to bring in certain numbers of trucks, but it's not enough. It is not enough with the amount of needs that exists in Gaza, and also the restrictions on and the difficulties or the challenges in bringing the people out, and also increasing the number of hosting countries that can take care of those who are injured or who are in need of support. So we're still not at the full capacity of where we would like to work on the ground, whether it's us, WHO, or any of our partner UN agencies. We are not there yet.
In your first answer, you talked about the physical health hazards. You also you touched on the mental health hazards there in Gaza. And I'm just thinking to myself that for the people of Gaza facing a third winter exposed to the elements, to have what little they have, their homes, their tents flooded, their belongings perhaps destroyed or in very short supply. I mean, this must be a massive blow to morale and in turn to the mental health of the people of Gaza.
Absolutely. I think the mental health situation, the stress, there has not been one family or a group of individuals that have not been affected directly by the atrocities that have been taking place over the past 2 years. The continuous displacement and the multiple displacements from one area to another, the changes in the way that they are being supported, from the trickling in of the support into the country, for them to needing to fight for the minimum amount of food to sustain. As you know, also the amount of malnutrition has been significant. The hunger has been significant. The devastation of the amputees, of the orphanages. So there's a lot of issues that they're going to have to be dealing with for decades to come. These young children are going to be growing up and remembering the atrocity. We have a lot of widows. We have a lot of maimed individuals, individuals who are left with long life disabilities. For the rest of their life, they're going to be suffering with this. And we in WHO, we're trying to work with partners to establish what are the best ways to support them today, but what are the plans that are going to need to be put in place to support these individuals go through their grieving, go through their recovery process, and also these young orphans and children and young adults with these lifelong disabilities. It's a huge lift that we have to do. We're very ready to move forward with our partners. The amount of funding is way below the needed at the moment. But I think, as you say, first things first, we have to deal with the issues on hand right now and hope that we will be able to come together to address some of these more chronic issues.
So do you think it was with regards to the mental health situation and the burden that's been placed on the minds of people of Gaza that the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros, was referring when he said there in Gaza there is a health catastrophe, he called it, that will last for generations to come? I mean, do you think that's what he meant by that?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what he meant by that. And we do see that the stress that is being compounded, and the longer this takes for us to try to return to some normality in Gaza, the deeper the impact is going to be on the population of Gaza.
And Dr. Balkhi, I wanted to ask you as well about the situation in Sudan, in particular the health situation there, because we're following developments on the ground there carefully on this channel. Just what's the latest you can tell us about the situation?
So the situation in Sudan, again, as you know, this is the largest humanitarian crisis. It is one of the most devastating also situations that you can see on the ground. It is quite difficult to describe how you have certain areas where we need to support and work, and we do work closely with the Ministry of Health on the routine and the regular chronic diseases. But at the same time, we have significant access issues into many areas, including the Kordofans, the Darfurs, and the significant humanitarian situation in Al-Fashir is of grave concern to us. Now, also with the winter entering, we're also managing at least 4 disease outbreaks on top of the atrocities from the attacks on the people and their incarceration in certain geographical areas. We're talking about 30% of the population in Sudan that are displaced, and the largest displacement crisis in the world. So some of them have fled, some of them remain in Sudan. So with all of this taking place, with the diseases such as dengue fever, malaria, cholera, meningitis, there needs to be better control over how can we bring medications, how can we bring the significant need for surveillance and disease identification into these restricted areas. How can we lift these atrocities that are taking place that are affecting the people of Sudan? And of course, the malnutrition that is happening. I can tell you one simple example. When you do have a cholera outbreak, cholera is really what we call it a fecal-oral transmission. So it is something that if you have clean water, you should not have cholera. And even if you did have cholera, the treatment of it is very simple. Good rehydration, good fluid reassessment, good fluid and electrolyte balance treatment. All of those can prevent disease. We're talking about a case fatality rate in Sudan from cholera of 2.8%. It needs to be less than 1%. So you're talking about a disease that is transmitted because of poor hygiene, and also a disease that can't be fully prevented, the death from it, if you had good treatment centers and rehydration centers. Again, with dengue, you're talking about a vector-borne disease. So these are all things that can be prevented, and that's what hurts us the most in WHO, that we can prevent these illnesses, we can prevent these deaths. These people can have a better life. So we're hoping that the diplomatic venues do lead to some kind of peace within Sudan, so that we can go back and work within all of the 18 provinces, provide the support that is needed, and alleviate the suffering that is happening, whether it's WHO and all of our UN agencies and partners and the Ministry of Health.
Yeah, I mean, you paint an extremely bleak picture of the situation in Sudan. Ongoing violence. It's the rainy season now, presumably meaning the disease spread is all the more risky. And clearly, with the violence ongoing, an extremely dangerous and challenging place for relief workers and humanitarian workers to be. What are you hearing from your teams about that?
Yeah, so on the safety of the humanitarian workers, also we have big concerns about that. We're hoping that they will be protected by the international law, but that is still not the place. So our teams and our people are taking huge risks by moving into some of these areas, but that has not deterred us, and we continue to seek the best ways to provide the support and access to those people who are in those most difficult areas.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Hanan Balkhi, the World Health Organization's Regional Director for the Eastern Mediterranean. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, do stay tuned to Al Arabiya English.